You may know India as a country in South Asia, but did you know its name actually comes from the Indus River? Yup, and there's more. India is also called Bharata, named after an ancient emperor mentioned in one of the greatest Indian epics, the Mahabharata. It's said that Emperor Bharata conquered the entire Indian subcontinent and brought peace and harmony to the land. Because of him, the region was often called Bharatavarsha, which basically means the land of Bharata. Now let's rewind way back. Archaeologists have found that humans were living in India more than 250,000 years ago. That makes it one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on Earth. And we're talking ancient stone tools, early human artifacts, signs of life from long, long ago. But here's the thing, while we often hear about ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia or Egypt, India's history is just as rich and complex, even though it doesn't always get the same attention. One of the standout civilizations was the Indus Valley civilization, which existed from around 7000 to 600 BCE. This wasn't just any small ancient village, it covered more territory than Egypt or Mesopotamia. They had an incredibly advanced culture, with cities, drainage systems, public baths, and get this, they even had flush toilets. That's right, something we totally take for granted today started way back then. Plus, India gave birth to 4 major world religions: Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism. Their contributions didn't stop there. They influenced math, medicine, plastic surgery, board games, yoga, and so much more. But the story goes even further back. The region of present-day India, along with Pakistan and Nepal, has some of the oldest human activity ever discovered. Scientists found evidence that the proto-human species Homo heidelbergensis lived here long before modern humans migrated to Europe. Archaeological digs didn't really kick off in India until the 1920s, way later than in places like Egypt and Mesopotamia, which is why India's ancient history didn't get as much spotlight early on. One interesting find is the village of Balathal, near Udaipur in Rajasthan. This site, dating back to 4000 BCE, wasn't even discovered until 1962, and excavations only started in the 1990s. Another important site is Mayurgarh, from around 7000 BCE, which shows evidence of even older human settlements. In just the last 50 years, archaeology in India has uncovered so many amazing discoveries that have reshaped our understanding of world history. For example, a skeleton found in Balathal in 2009 revealed the oldest case of leprosy in India. And that's pretty significant because it shows leprosy was around much earlier than previously thought. It likely didn't just come from Africa as was once believed. By the Holocene period, we're talking about 10,000 years ago, India was already bustling with human activity. And now let's dive a little deeper into the Mohenjo-daro and Harappan civilizations, which were part of the incredible Indus Valley civilization. Now, this civilization dates all the way back to around 7000 BCE. It expanded across the lower Gangetic Valley and stretched north and south, building massive cities way ahead of their time. In fact, these cities were even larger than other settlements around the world back then. What's super cool is how advanced their city planning was. The cities were laid out based on the cardinal points, like a giant compass, and were built with bricks, often kiln-fired for extra durability. The houses had a big central courtyard, with rooms branching off for cooking, working, and sleeping. It seems like the heart of family life happened in these courtyards, which kind of reminds me of how homes in ancient Rome, Egypt, and Greece were set up. But here's the kicker. The Indus Valley cities were even more advanced. Some houses had flush toilets and ventilation systems, which acted like ancient air conditioning long before anyone else had figured that out. Two of the most famous cities from this period are Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, both located in present-day Pakistan. Harappa has given its name to this civilization, and it's often referred to as the Harappan civilization. But here's where things get interesting. Harappa, as amazing as it was, got pretty messed up in the 19th century when British workers used its materials for railway construction. Imagine how much more we could have learned if it had been preserved. On the flip side, Mohenjo-Daro stayed mostly hidden underground until 1922, so it's much better preserved. The name Mohenjo-Daro translates to Mound of the Dead in Sindhi, and this name was given because locals kept finding bones, ceramics, and other artifacts there. The real name of the city, still a mystery. Some think it might have been called Kakutarma, or City of the Cock, which could hint at either ritual cockfighting or maybe even a breeding ground for cocks. Crazy, right? What's even more impressive is how well organized Mohenjo-Daro was. The streets were laid out at perfect right angles, and they had an advanced drainage system that could rival anything we've seen from ancient Rome. One of the most famous structures there is the Great Bath, a massive public pool that seems to have been a central gathering spot. Plus, the people here were skilled in working with metals like copper, bronze, and tin. They even left behind stunning artifacts like the famous bronze statue of the dancing girl, which is just mind-blowing when you think about how long ago it was made. But like all great civilizations, the Harappan civilization didn't last forever. Around 2000 to 1500 BCE, the region saw the arrival of the Aryans, a group that migrated into India and blended with the local culture. They brought along their gods, their language, Sanskrit, and their own beliefs, which started to mix with the local traditions. This cultural fusion led to some big changes in the region. Now, why did the Harappan civilization decline? Scholars have a few theories. Some think it could have been climate change. Evidence shows that there were both floods and droughts in the area, and the Indus River might have started flooding more often, damaging crops and leading to famine. Others suggest that trade relations with Mesopotamia and Egypt, two of their biggest trading partners, could have collapsed because those regions were going through their own issues at the time. One theory that's been long discredited is the idea that the civilization fell due to an invasion by light-skinned Aryans. This was pushed by early 20th century thinkers, but has since been debunked. And as for the more out-there theory that aliens or some kind of ancient atomic blast wiped out the civilization, yeah, that one doesn't hold much water either. What's true is that the city of Mohenjo-Daro shows signs of vitrification, where parts of the brick and stone look like they've been exposed to extreme heat. Some think it might have been the result of warfare, but anything more dramatic, like alien involvement, is pretty unlikely. And now, we're diving into what happened next, the Vedic period. This was a pretty interesting time because society shifted dramatically after the abandonment of those ancient cities. People adopted more of a pastoral lifestyle, focusing on agriculture and livestock. But the biggest change? The emergence of religious texts known as the Vedas. Now, these Vedas weren't just religious guides, they shaped society itself. This period saw the birth of a social structure called the Varna system, which you might know as the caste system. In the early days, it was based on your occupation, but over time it became more rigid, and you were born into your caste. There were 4 main classes. At the top, you had the Brahmanas, they are priests and scholars. Then the Kshatriyas, means warriors, followed by the Vaishyas, means farmers and merchants, and at the bottom, the Shudras, means laborers. There's some debate about whether the Dalits, or untouchables, existed back then, but they were definitely at the bottom later on, doing jobs like handling waste. At first, it was all about what you did for a living. But as time went on, this system became way more rigid, tied to birth and, importantly, religious belief. The people believed in a cosmic order to life, which was established by a supreme god, and this order was reflected in the social hierarchy. Speaking of gods, let's talk about Sanatana Dharma, which later came to be known as Hinduism. The name comes from the Indus River, where early worshippers gathered. Sanatana Dharma isn't exactly polytheistic, though it might seem that way with so many gods. The belief is that there's one supreme god, Brahma, who represents the entire universe. But since Brahma is too vast to comprehend fully, The many gods and goddesses we see are simply different aspects of Brahm. Pretty cool, right? This belief system really influenced how society was structured. People believed that by living in harmony with this eternal order, their lives would unfold as they were meant to. During this time, a bunch of important religious texts and stories were written down, like the Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Ramayana. These texts didn't just shape religion, they had a massive impact on culture, politics, and daily life in the region. But then, around the 6th century BCE, we saw some major changes. Two reformers, Vardhamana Mahavira and Siddhartha Gautama, better known as the Buddha, broke away from mainstream Sanatana Dharma. Mahavira founded Jainism, while the Buddha went on to found Buddhism. They both rejected the Vedas and emphasized that individuals were responsible for their own salvation and enlightenment. This was a big shift away from the traditional religious beliefs of the time. Not everyone was into the spiritual stuff though. There was a philosophical school called Charvaka that rejected anything supernatural. These guys were all about trusting the senses and focusing on personal pleasure. While Charvaka didn't last as a major movement, it did leave a mark on how people started thinking about the world in a more grounded, practical way, which later influenced scientific and empirical thought. As all this religious and philosophical development was happening, cities were growing and becoming wealthier, and that wealth caught the eye of Cyrus the Great of Persia. In 530 BCE, he invaded India, and his son Darius I solidified Persian control over the northern regions. This period brought new influences into Indian culture, especially religious and artistic exchanges between the Persians and Indians. But Persia's control didn't last forever. Along came Alexander the Great in 330 BCE, who marched into India after conquering Persia. His influence led to a blend of Greek and Buddhist culture in northern India, something we can still see in the art from that period, like statues of the Buddha dressed in Hellenic fashion. After Alexander left, the Mauryan Empire rose, led by Chandragupta Maurya, and eventually his grandson Ashoka the Great came to power. Ashoka is a key figure in Indian history. 8 years into his reign, he conquered Kalinga, but the death and destruction there shook him to the core. This led him to embrace Buddhism, and he spent the rest of his life promoting Buddhist principles. He built monasteries, funded Buddhist communities, and even sent out missionaries to spread the teachings. Thanks to Ashoka, Buddhism grew from a small sect to a major religion. Unfortunately, after Ashoka's death, the Mauryan Empire declined and India fragmented into smaller kingdoms. Trade with Rome also picked up during this period, especially after Augustus Caesar annexed Egypt, turning Rome into India's primary trading partner. Then came the Gupta Empire, which is often called India's Golden Age. It was founded by Sri Gupta, and during this time, everything from science and mathematics to literature and art flourished. You might have heard of the mathematician Aryabhata. He's credited with recognizing the importance of zero. We also got masterpieces like Kalidasa's Shakuntala, and even the Kama Sutra was written during this period. The Gupta rulers were Buddhists, which is why we see so much Buddhist art from this era. However, the Gupta Empire eventually fell, replaced by the rule of Harshavardhan, who tried to keep the north united. But after his death, India splintered again. This made it easier for invaders like the Huns and later the Muslim general Muhammad bin Qasim to take control, leading to the establishment of Islamic sultanates in northern India. From this point on, India was shaped by a mix of Islamic and indigenous influences, which continued all the way until British colonization and eventually India's independence in 1947.